In today's episode, we are featuring a story about a man who has gone through his trial by fire and has come out stronger and empowered. After overcoming his own addictions to marijuana and other drugs, his journey took him through many rough patches that challenged him physically and mentally. This episode themes around his addiction, rehabilitation, his road to recovery, the importance of therapy, and his ongoing journey with mental stability. He is the founder of the blog All Over Cric, where he blends real-life stories with the sport. Jayesh, welcome to the show. Can you tell us, where does your story begin?
So it got really bad for me, right? We're talking about a period of maybe 5 years, right? Where I was on and off a heavy diet of marijuana and, a cocktail of pills. But the last, 2.5 years out of these 5 years, I'm talking about being high 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day, maybe going on 72-hour drug binges, right? This is when things got really, really bad. I was burning a lot of bridges with a lot of my friends, right? But also, we're talking about pretty destructive behavior, going out on a night out, getting into a bar fight, right? Getting into physical altercations, almost getting into physical altercations with people who were too nice to, get into a physical altercation with me. But things got very, very bad at one point. And that's when the intervention happened. And, just to talk you through the intervention as well. At this point, I realized that the prescription drugs I was taking were not very good for me. So I started to wean myself off those drugs by myself, which is not something you should do. But at this stage, since marijuana was my primary drug of choice, I was still in denial that, that is what I was addicted to, right? And I held on to every single narrative I could find in the media about, marijuana being safe and, it's not an addictive drug, blah, 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 blah. I hung on to anything that could be construed to be, a legitimate study, right? I was just rationalizing my own addiction. And there was one day where, I shit you not, 7-8 hours, I'm storming up and down the house. I was living with my parents at this point, storming up and down the house. I was screaming at the top of my voice. I cannot quite remember what I was screaming about, but I was angry at everyone, right? And a big reason for this was the sudden withdrawal from, this cocktail of anti-anxiety, antipsychotic, and all these medicines, right? So that's when my extended family and my family decided to have an intervention. Say, okay, you know what? We have to do something about this right now. So they'd already looked into a rehab facility for me. They called them as well. They said, okay, there's no guarantee he's going to come. And they're like, yeah, we totally understand. This happens every day. There's so many interventions and not all of them work. But, if he does agree to come, we can get set up pretty quickly. We've got the paperwork and everything like that. We've done this a million times. So everything was set over there. The only thing they needed is for me to say yes. And they'd casually approach me at some point in the past, and I just completely dismissed it. But this was the first time there was a full-blown intervention. So my cousin comes over, my uncle comes over, my sister's over, my dad, he gets off work as well. My mom's there, obviously. And I just remember all of them in the living room, right? And my cousin's the one who spoke. And he said, Jay, bro, you need to go to rehab. And I totally dismissed him, probably threw in a few expletives as well. And I turned my back on them and started walking towards my room or my bathroom to, smoke more weed and get really, really high. And I was about to turn the corner, into my room. And I hear my uncle say, I still remember these words, "You fucking pussy." I thought he's talking about me. So I turned back. I'm ready to give it back to this guy. but he was pointing at my dad. He told my dad, if you don't do something today, if you don't send him to rehab, he's going to die. He's going to die because of you. And something in me just clicked. I broke down. I started crying. I looked for someone's shoulder. I went towards someone. I can't remember to this day who I hugged. I buried my head in that person's shoulder. And I said, okay, I'll go. Yeah. But at this point, my whole family knew, okay, you know what, this guy might change his mind. So let's get him on a flight today. So they got me on a flight that very night. The next day, I was in rehab. So intervention happened 19 hours later. I'm already in a different country, in Thailand, in rehab, checked in. Yeah. So that's how the intervention happened, and that's what led to me going to rehab. That decision, or rather that intervention, it's a combination of the two. That saved my life. I'm pretty sure if I had said no, I can't imagine what would have happened if I just said no at that point. You know, how long before they would try again, right? And what would happen to me in that time, right? How much more trouble would I get in, right? Would I get in trouble with the law, right? How would it affect my health, my friendships, my personal relationships?
But you reckon, like, you mentioned that you had already started to try to wean off the drugs yourself, and you were doing it on your own, but there was a part of you that was recognizing that there was a problem here, hence why you were working on doing it yourself. So maybe that was already the start to the changes. It was just that you were not doing it the right way. Like, if it didn't happen at that intervention, perhaps somewhere very close down the line, that would have ended up happening, because maybe you would have realized that, okay, I can't do this on my own. I need help. And you would have maybe even asked for it yourself, because you were recognizing it, or you were already at that first stage of like understanding that there is a problem here.
Once again, you're giving a little too much credit to a 25-year-old.
Hey, you said it yourself. You were weaning off it. Okay, anywhoos. Let's
No. See, I mean, it's actually interesting you raised that point, right? Because see, addiction has a big impact on, the people closest to you,
Sure.
right? They want to think the best of you.
Mm-hmm.
But, at the end of the day, I was an incredibly manipulative person. I would do absolutely anything to support my addiction, right? I've stolen from friends, right? I stole from my family as well at the time, right? Anything. I would lie about how much I was smoking, just absolutely anything. And in my mind, it's strange how my brain rationalized that behavior and told me it's okay, right?
Or believed your lies.
You're doing it as well, right? There's a part of you that wants to give 25-year-old me the benefit of the doubt, but like we learned in rehab, it's not about playing the blame game and being like, hey, is his addiction his fault or society's fault? It's a combination of the two. It is actually both, right? It's circumstance, but it's also, as an addict, you have to take responsibility as well, right? So, I mean, and I think that's why the rehab facility I went to worked so well, right? Because it was a combination of, okay, we will listen to you, we will listen to what happened in your childhood, but at the same time, like, don't bullshit yourself. You could have stopped. It was hard, but you could have stopped, right? And now that you're here, now you're getting the therapy, now that we're giving you the wisdom, we're giving you the tools, now you have no excuse, right? So there's this thing called euphoric recall, right? If you're in rehab and you're reminiscing about the good times. Oh, this one time I was using and I did this and I did that, and it was a great time. Yeah, that was very frowned upon at the facility that I was in. It's one of those dangerous behaviors that can get you back into using. At the end of the day, there's nothing. There's nothing. There are very few positive. There are just no positive memories that an addict has about using drugs.
Do you remember your first day of rehab? Like when you first walked in, did you like automatically applied yourself and tried to get better? Like how was it? How did you react? Do you remember that?
I mean, the very first day, I mean, I was full of enthusiasm. Oh yeah, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this,
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
Oh wait, it was actually a combination of that and a combination of, okay, you know what? Let me just get through rehab, fool everyone, and
Oh.
start smoking weed again. Right. So it was two. I was two different people. I had two different attitudes on the same day.
Right.
But um, my withdrawal was also pretty extreme. Right. They realized at that point, okay, you know what? With the prescription pills, it's not so serious that we can't completely take you off it, right? So they decided, okay, you know what? It's safe to completely go off it. In my case,
Like cold turkey?
Yeah. Like a cold, like it was a cold turkey situation. It would be completely different if heroin was my drug of choice,
Right.
or even alcohol. You cannot go in many cases. You cannot go cold turkey off heroin and alcohol. It will cause death in some situations, right? But yeah, for me, they took me off cold turkey. But I'd fall asleep on one side of my bed, wake up in the middle of the night. That entire side of the bed was wet, so I'd switch to another side. So my withdrawals were bad for very uncomfortable for a few days, and I had a couple of sleepless nights. But
when did you realize like that? You said you came in there with two types of like ideas of how it was going to go down: the enthusiastic Jay versus the let me just get through this so I can like please my family and get back on the drugs. When did you realize that the enthusiastic Jay like beat that other Jay?
well, actually, I'm glad you asked that question, because it took me a while to actually come around in rehab. Right, it took me maybe 3 weeks to actually come around. And a lot of people, they're in rehab for like 4 to 8 weeks. Right, I pretty much just pissed around for the first like 2.5 weeks. And there was a point where I escaped from rehab as well. I just ran away. We went to some outdoor sports center, and we were playing football. And the mind of the manipulative addict, I faked an injury, and I managed to like fool everyone. And I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go to the canteen and grab some ice. And I just didn't even run away. I just walked out.
Man, that's like Shawshank Redemption. Like that was thoroughly planned.
I'm telling you, the mind of addict. We're actually very, very smart people. Vast majority of addicts are very, very smart, but that's not a good thing, right? That's not something to take pride in, right? So it took me a while to actually get around, but yeah, I mean, by the time I left, I was taking almost like a leadership role amongst the community there. I wasn't getting on my high horse and being like, yo, you know what, just do whatever I say. Because it's like, okay, you know what, I'm an addict. Like if I knew what I was doing, I wouldn't be here, kind of thing. But just simple things where I was taking a roll call anytime we went out of rehab on an organized activity. I was just making sure that nobody else ran away, right? Which was a huge role reversal from who I was in the first 3 weeks. But so yeah, I was actually in rehab, I believe, for 13 weeks. I was there for 13 weeks. So yeah, I was one of the more seasoned patients.
How do they decide when you are like finished with rehab? I've always wondered, like, when do they decide to like, yeah, Jay is good to go back home. He is fully rehabilitated. What is the checklist?
Well, it's a private facility.
Okay.
Right. So I mean, they're always gonna say, hey, you know what, stay as long as you need to stay, kind of thing.
They want to make their money. Right.
Yeah. But I mean, for me, I basically had a choice. I knew I had to do at least 2 months or 10 weeks or something, right? Like my issues ran pretty deep, right? And I also just didn't really get much out of it in the first 2 or 3 weeks, and that was kind of my fault. In fact, it was my fault, right? So I just didn't count the first 3 weeks really. So yeah, actually, what a lot of people do is after rehab, they go into a transitional house or a halfway house, as it's known. So it's not really like rehab, but you're living with other addicts, and quite often there are therapists who either live there or they're there like most of the day, right? So you have a lot more freedom than someone would in rehab. You can go out and get a job, right? But there are rules like, okay, you know what? There's maybe a 10 p.m. curfew or a 9 p.m. curfew. You have to wake up at X time, and like there's a group therapy session in the morning, right? So it's almost like, for lack of a better phrase, it's like rehab light kind of thing. But for me, I just felt good and supported in regular rehab. I didn't feel like I needed that freedom to go out and like have a job, and I just didn't need to do that financially. And for me, just the opportunity to get out of rehab like 3 times a week, that was enough for me. I was like, I don't feel trapped, I don't feel claustrophobic, so I'm just going to stay here, and I'm going to treat traditional rehab like my halfway house kind of thing.
But it was you that had to make that decision in saying, okay, I think I'm ready to get back out there in the world and be a functioning member of society. So what was it like? Did you develop this trust in yourself? Like, how did you get to that point where you decided it was safe for you to get out?
Yeah. I think that's interesting, because when you are an addict, you don't always know what's best for you, right? So they told us this as well. If you want to do well in rehab, you've got to surrender, right? You have to surrender to the judgment of other people. So you've got to surrender to the judgment of the professionals, but also your family, right? So for me, I was like, okay, you know what? I'll leave rehab when the experts, when my family, when they feel like, I've gotten to a good point, then I'll go, right? And it was a nice, like, harmonious decision. I never felt in those last few weeks that I was trapped. I think there's this common misconception: oh, you're in rehab, you're trapped, you're basically in jail. And some people would actually raise that point in group therapy sessions. Oh, I feel like I'm in jail. But I mean, the reality is jail's a hell of a lot worse than rehab. There's absolutely no comparison. Right. Like, we could have as many iced coffees as we wanted to. There's a swimming pool. Like, that's not jail, right? That is just not jail at all, right? So, yeah. For me, it was about surrendering to the judgment of other people, and see, at some point, I would have to go into the outside world. There'd be temptation, right? Drugs all over the place in practically every country in the world, right? So there's temptation just at every corner, really.
So you come out of rehab. Tell us a little bit about your life post-rehab.
Yeah. This is where the plot thickens even further. But so actually the last couple of weeks in rehab, I started to run out of energy. I'm not sure if this is actually in the article. I don't think this actually made the article. And perhaps you guys, Jen, I feel like you know at least part of the story. For the last 2.5 weeks of rehab, I had absolutely no energy at all, right? It was very hard for me to like walk around, to bend down, lift things up. And it was just very strange. I couldn't really think. I couldn't process thoughts. I couldn't actually have conversations with people. So something like my body was slowing down and my mind was slowing down. And it just made no sense.
It's like chronic fatigue?
That's pretty much what happened. It was, whatever happened, it mimicked the effects of chronic fatigue syndrome, right?
Did it have anything to do with like re-assimilating with society? Going back into Hong Kong after rehab?
See, a lot of people had that theory, and a lot of people said, "Oh, it's mental, right?" I was like, I feel better and wiser than I've felt in a very long time, perhaps my entire life. Like, I'm at in terms of wisdom and, just serenity and acceptance, I'm at my high point in life. So I knew for a fact that it wasn't mental, right? Um, but to summarize what actually happened, I came out of rehab and I was practically bedbound for 8 months. So if I went for a walk, I went for a half an hour walk, I'd be tired for the next 2 weeks, right? It was very, very serious, right? There were the days where, there were periods where I spent 15 days in bed and I only got up to, brush my teeth. Sometimes I'd brush my teeth at like 6 p.m., right? It would take me that long to, muster the energy to get out of bed. So I had absolutely no energy to do anything. It was, I thought my life was over. Right.
8 months as well is,
and
is
like,
a long time.
it just wasn't a mental thing. What it probably was, I'm 99% sure about this. This was what's known as a post-acute withdrawal syndrome, right? So these are withdrawal symptoms that only manifest maybe, a month, 2 months, or even 3 months after you get off, a very heavy dose of drugs for a very sustained period of time, right? So that's what I'm pretty sure that's what happened, right? And my mind and my body just had a very delayed withdrawal response. At the end of the day, if you're absolutely battering your brain with all kinds of drugs, you're high like 72 hours in a row, you're smoking and using every single day for like 2.5 years, and another 2.5 years before that, pretty heavy drug usage. It's going to take a toll on your brain, right? So for 8 months, it looked as if my life was over. I was like, okay, 25, that's it. This is it, right? Like, I'm done.
So you say at this moment you were saying that you were at a healthy mind state, but it was just your physical body that couldn't like muster any energy.
Yeah. And at some point, even my cognitive functions had dipped.
Right.
Had dipped considerably. I couldn't. The words would not really come out of my mouth. It would take me a lot of effort.
Right.
Like this podcast, for example. No way I could record a podcast back then. I just couldn't do conversations. I met up with friends on a couple of occasions, but it had to be very, very close to my house. I couldn't really commute anywhere. And sometimes I would go, I'd hang out, and I'd be in bed again for another 2 weeks. So
with your history of like a depression, this didn't have an effect on your like mind state. Like, I feel like that would be a tough thing for me to like, wrap my head around. I would get so depressed for 8 months.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure I can preempt what your question is. Did you ever think about suicide or taking your life? I certainly thought about that. I was even looking into options of euthanasia at this point, right? This is 8 months of not being able to do anything and no end in sight. We'd gone to so many doctors, including some very shady ones who just charged us a lot of money for the worst advice or medical advice ever.
And none of them were able to give you any kind of diagnosis. And I think that's the most daunting part about it, because when there's no diagnosis, then there's no potential treat or cure. And that's even scarier.
Right.
Yeah.
I had no way of, knowing what I had exactly and when I'd get better. The best answer was the most inconvenient answer. And the best answer was post-acute withdrawal syndrome. Right. And, at that time, I'm like, okay, you know what? If I have this, I have no idea if I'm ever going to get better. Like, have I just done permanent damage with my drug use? Right. And I guess this goes back to that question you asked me earlier. Oh, yeah, marijuana, it's not dangerous, right? It's a cool drug. Yeah. It's not like the other ones. Yeah, no. 8 months bed bound. It would tell you otherwise. Right. But I mean, I don't want to get stuck on that 8 months bedbound thing. One day I woke up and I was like, oh, you know what? I actually don't feel that bad, right? I didn't really think much of it. Just walked around the house, you know, in bed for most of the day, right? But before going to bed, I'm like, hey, that I felt a little different today. That was weird, right? So I wake up the next day and I just decide, okay, you know what? I'm gonna risk a complete crash. Like I said, I'd go for a half an hour walk or 1 hour walk. I'd crash for 2 weeks. Like, you know what? I'm gonna risk it. So I hopped on a bike. I think it was something like 8 minutes and 12 seconds or something like that. Hopped on a bike for 8 minutes and 12 seconds. I came back to my room and I got these dumbbells out of my cupboard, and I just lifted some dumbbells with the worst form known to man. But I didn't care because I was like, okay, you know what? At that point, I'm like, okay, you know what? I have a feeling I'm okay. And it was either the next day or 2 days later, I went for a very long walk on, Hong Kong viewers will know this, the Hung Hom Bay Bridge that goes from TST to Hung Hom.
Yeah, you get the whole view. Yeah.
I went on a walk, I'm overweight. I'm wearing this massive windbreaker that doesn't fit me. I got like long shorts and like gray socks coming up to my knees. I was the worst dressed person there without a doubt. And it's raining. It starts raining. I have no idea how strong it was raining. And to this day, I can remember the raindrops on my hood, gray, cloudy skies. You could barely see the skyline in the distance. And it was bloody beautiful. I knew, okay, it's 8 months, it's done. That suffering is done. Like, now I am officially back. It was the greatest feeling ever.
That's awesome, dude. That sounds like, one of those montages, like in those sport movies where, you finally reach that peak of, performance and you are ready.
It's like liberation.
Yeah, freedom, definitely. Freedom. That's amazing. How would you compare it to like getting out of quarantine? Is it something similar?
Well, I mean, honestly, those experiences made quarantine a hell of a lot easier for me. 21 days is compared to 8 months, right?
Sure.
And at the end of the 21 days, you're going to get out as well.
Yeah,
right.
And for me, I was like, okay, you know what? Even if I test positive on the last day, what are they going to do? Quarantine me for another 14 days?
Yeah. I mean, but I think at this point as well, like fully functioning limbs, body,
right.
mind is...
Take that any day,
exactly.
Right? Yeah. That's
100%.
That's
amazing. Love my limbs.
Love my limbs.
Work, walk.
So
that's crazy.
Jay is liberated after the run. He feels great. What happens next to him? Where does he go?
It was pretty normal.
Yeah.
After that, but no, just being able to think and have conversations and walk places and commute places, that really helped me. Accelerate the process of rebuilding burnt bridges. Right, I had a lot of bridges to mend, including with one of my best friends. Right, and at the time, like he was going to get married pretty soon, and at first I wasn't invited to the wedding, which was very, very hard for me to take. It was this was a like just a huge blow, right? But yeah, eventually, we kind of mended fences, which was just, it's fantastic. It was fantastic. And yeah, I was able to make it out for his wedding, and some of my other friends were there. And it was also tough attending that wedding, because it's not like, things are going to go back to exactly the way they were. But like the last couple of days at that wedding, I was like, okay, you know what? Like, yeah, I think like we're starting to rebuild something.
Yeah.
And with a couple of them, the dude who was getting married, and another friend of mine, what I think a year and a half, maybe, yeah, I would say a year on from that wedding, our friendship grew a hell of a lot stronger than it ever was. Right. So yeah, after the 8 months rebuilding bridges, getting a regular corporate stooge job that I didn't like, but
Yeah.
it was just nice, normal life. But I would say for those after getting better, I was unemployed for maybe I think 3 or 4 months. Best 3 or 4 months of my life, right? It was so weird. I was just overwhelmed with gratitude, and I felt like I was I felt like I was born again. And it's sometimes, there've been times in the last couple of years where I've lost that sense of gratitude. So I was trying to remind myself of, how lucky I am, not just to be where I am today, considering where I was, but just how lucky I am to just have life and exist. Right. And one thing I do is I should do this every day. I should make this a New Year's resolution.
Let's hear it. What is it?
But I've got an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It's a gratitude list. So it's just got one column's got a date, and the other 3 columns are just grateful 1, grateful 2, grateful 3. And I just list 3 things that I'm grateful for that either happened that day or I'm just grateful for in general. And it makes a massive difference. I recommend a gratitude list to absolutely anyone.
Yes, listeners.
It's not gonna hurt you.
Yeah,
It takes like 5 seconds.
Right. I mean, it's tough for people to like write it down and get their thoughts onto paper. And I mean, you being a writer, obviously with your article, like how did you reignite how did you ignite that passion for writing?
Yeah, so I was actually, it's interesting you asked me that, because I was working in recruitment, actually, which is basically I was a glorified salesman, right? And didn't quite like it. But at the same time, I was in my free time, I was going to this writers meetup, right? And that's where I got better as a writer. A lot of people told me, dude, you write well. So yeah, that's when I really started to enjoy my writing, and I started to grow as a writer. I was just better as a result of that.
Did you have to build like a habit, build a habit with writing? I feel like that's the hardest thing to do. Like, did you try to take out a few moments out of the day to write?
Well, I mean, when I was in recruitment, I didn't really have time for a lot of stuff. Right. It's a very demanding profession, but that going to that once a week was huge. Right. So that was my routine. I didn't do a lot of writing outside of the writers group. I'd done some writing before, but it was interesting. So I got into, after I quit recruitment, someone from the writers group, she was an editor at a testing inspection certification company. I'm not going to talk you through my resume, I'll make it short, but I had no plan when I quit. I just had to get out of there. Didn't like my boss, didn't like the industry, or what it was doing to me. And I was just very, very lucky that, she had a lot of freelance work for me. Right. So what I did is I combined that, and I had a couple more clients, and then I started writing about cricket for fun. And it just so happens that now that is my full-time career. I'm a live commentator and sports journalist, which is really cool. I have my own website. I have other writers who write for me now. I did have a podcast, much like you guys.
Okay.
But now I'm not too sure about the future of the podcast, because the other 2 things, the writing and the commentary, they're probably going to take up most of my time. But no. So yeah, life's been good since then. It's been a journey and a half,
There really is a big difference, though, between writing for another person or writing for a company versus doing it for yourself, your own company, your own kind of, there is like a sense of passion that comes out. There is this you're doing it in your direction, in your pace, in your, with your own kind of goals and visions in place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anyone who's ever started their own business or their own venture will tell you, you're going to be living on a low cost structure to kick things off, right? So and especially with the pandemic, it's kind of messed things up. But in spite of all of this, I'm wiser and probably happier than I've ever been.
That's awesome.
Ever.
Jay, you've got one hell of a story, though. I mean, it's crazy. I've listened to it a couple of times now. You've told me this a few times, actually, even before we started this whole podcast thing. But every time I listen to it, I feel like there's like new little bits that come out, and I'm just like blown away all over again. It's like I'm hearing it for the first time.
Yeah. No,
Crazy.
it's a story of, like rebuilding, being destroyed so you can rebuild, and like now you are the person who you want to be. How do you feel? Like, are you happy when you look yourself in the mirror? Do you feel satisfied now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm grateful for everything I have. There's a quote I have on my desktop. It's by Epictetus.
Mm.
I'm gonna try and remember it without looking. Let's see how successful I am at this. This is a test of my memory. But the quote is, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen." Right. So for me, that's a really important quote. A big theme in my life right now is acceptance. Right. And especially with everything we're going through with the pandemic. Ugh. And it's honestly been very, very bad for my business. It's cost me a few $100,000. Right. So this is no joke. But at the same time, it's like, wait, like, why am I happy again? Like, in spite of that, like, that's weird. Right. But yeah, I mean, it's about making peace with the way the world is. And it's taken me a very, very long time to get there and to feel like that. There are days where I don't feel like that. But I know that it's a process, and so, one message I would like to get out there to anyone, especially people of color, right? Men of color from, South Asian backgrounds, from Asian backgrounds, from African backgrounds, right? Even, yeah, I think I've covered most of the world at this point. But if you're a man and you are struggling with mental health issues, get help, get professional help, because I would not be where I am today without professional help. I'll tell you that 100%. It's I've seen 7 different therapists in my life. The first 2 or 3 didn't work out for me. I shopped around a little bit, and yeah, it's without professional help, it's not gonna happen for you. And try, along with professional help, talk to someone. Find that one person in your life that you can confide in, right? 1 or 2 people. I'm lucky. I've got family who fulfill that role for me. I've had a couple of friends who fulfill that role for me as well. So it could be a very, very long road, but there's definitely hope out there, and there's help out there, and you have to seek that help. It's just that simple. Forget about your community, forget about what people are going to think, and just try and do the right things for yourself. There's seeking help does not make you less of a man at all.
Yeah, I love that.
So yeah, that's what I want people to take out of this. And perhaps that's why I'm also happier now than I've ever been in my life, because I have a why in life, right? Like, sure, I am a shameless capitalist, earning money to like pay for stuff,
Right.
but at the same time, I try and incorporate as much generosity into my life as possible, right? Whether that's donating blood, volunteering somewhere, like tomorrow I got this thing. I'm just we're just giving out supplies to the homeless. Whether it's doing stuff like this, whether it's being that friend that people can talk to and trust, that friend who's not going to go and tell the whole world what you just told them, right? These small things, right? And like that's my why in life. Any sort of adversity, like COVID-19, like being quarantined, it gives me the opportunity to practice living a virtuous life, and that adds meaning to my life.
You're a wise one, Jayesh.
Very wise, and your story.
I'm a lucky one. I'm a lucky one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we close today's episode, is there anything you would like to plug in? Anything you would like to say? Any projects you're working on?
I mean, I'm not working on any projects related to mental health per se, but there is an article on my website. My website is allovercric.com. I write about cricket, the sport, not the insect. And there's an article on there. You'll have to scroll down. I think I wrote it in August. If you're not into cricket, you don't have to check out the website. I'm not here to plug my profession or my products, but I'm here as a human being, and hopefully, if I can even help one person with my candor throughout this podcast, I'd be happy.
No, we appreciate that.
The result.
The thing is, that article, if I can say one more thing, that article is not just about cricket. The way you write it, you blend cricket, but then you also blend real life and struggle and addiction. And it's more than just, cricket. Like when you write, there's life and there's substance in it. So people, you guys should read that article. It is amazing. I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really into cricket, but when I read that, I was totally pulled in, because it was more your story, just through the lens of cricket. But there were bits and pieces of cricket in it. It was more focused on you and your journey of life. Right?
Jayesh, thank you for being vulnerable. If you guys would like to learn more about Jayesh and his blog, All Over Cricket, we will leave all the links in the description.
If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow or subscribe. Also, we would love to hear from you. Please give us feedback by rating and reviewing on any of our different platforms listed in the description.
We'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and courageous enough to share their life experiences with the rest of the world. We appreciate your perspective. Thank you for showing us we are human. We would like to give a special thanks to our producer, videographer, sound engineer, and everything else in between, Joe Mills. The show would be nothing without you. I'm Joseph.
And I'm Jenica.
And we are Multispective.